So let me introduce you to our speaker. Many of you may already know him. Dr. Peter Aiken is an internationally recognized thought leader in the data management field. Many of you already know him and have seen him at conferences nationally and worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions. He's the founding director of Data Blueprint, associate professor of information systems at Virginia Commonwealth University, and president of DAMA International. Peter has held a variety of positions, 2 of them with the Department of Defense and Software Engineering Institute. By now, he has written 7 books and dozens of articles, and he's currently working on his 8th book. He's experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as one of the top 10 data management experts in the world. He's highly desired at conferences and workshops and always traveling to numerous speaking engagements and projects. So Peter, where in the world are you today?
I am on my way between Istanbul, Turkey, and Seattle. So Shannon, I'm going to be out in your part of the world in a couple of hours, and looking forward to meeting with the Seattle DAMA chapter out there, as well as some other folks for a brief trip. And I do want to extend my greetings to our new DAMA members in Turkey who have officially started their chapter. We had a fantastic meeting. In particular, it was very gratifying to have Dr. Stephen Brobst on the program as well. Some of you may know Stephen. He is the Chief Technology Officer for Teradata. So we had a terrific session. It was good to catch up with him on this. And Shannon, I don't know if you've seen some of these things now, but they actually have a thing where you can put the Twitter feeds on the side of the presentation here, so I can't quite imagine how this would work, but it'd be interesting to see. People could, I guess, hassle us throughout the presentation and work on that way, but we'll worry about those details as we figure them out. All the social media is fairly new to us, so we need some smart young people to explain it to us. Welcome, everybody. Again, thanks to Dataversity for hosting this, and to Shannon for doing the actual legwork on this. This is, again, brought to you by Data Blueprint and the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Business, where we are the largest university in the state of Virginia. And our outline for today is pretty straightforward. Again, it's a fairly compact agenda for 1 hour, but we are looking forward to the Q&A session at the end of it, because we find we end up learning a bunch of things as well. So we're looking forward to your questions as we get towards the end of the hour there. We'll give you an overview of data management, where we always start with. We'll talk specifically about what data operations management is and why is it so important. I'll then go through the basic building blocks that comprise data operations management, and then we'll talk about how you can use data operations management to improve data management within your organization. We'll finish up with some guiding principles and best practices, and at the top of the hour, finish it off with some takeaways. So let's get started and dive in for the overview of data management. As all of these talks are designed to do, we are hoping to increase the number of people worldwide that have reached the designation CDMP, that is Certified Data Management Professional. We are starting to see people have that in their job offers. When people are posting for positions, they're starting to say CDMP Preferred. Now, CDMP is a designation given by DAMA International, and it covers the things that you're seeing on the screen there. We started off in January with data governance right at the center of your screen, and then went to 12 o'clock, data architecture management, data development, and now we are at 4, right, which is really 3 on the clock there, but data operations management moving around the circle there. So that's the context for this. Again, DAMA International is quite proud of their body of knowledge that we have here. And it's not strictly a technical body of knowledge, but we also include in with it environmental elements as well. It's available in hard copy or soft copy at Amazon, or you can get it directly from the publisher as well. And we'll get the publisher's information up there for the next one. The Certified Data Management Professional designation is jointly issued by DAMA International and the Institute for the Certification of Computing Professionals. I mentioned before there are about 650 of you worldwide. For example, I know 2 of them in Arkansas. They're the only 2 in the entire state, and they're on the same row that I work on there, so it's great to catch up with everybody on that. Again, it's a series of 3 exams that covers some core material and then some specialization. So you can look at core material and then specialize in something like data quality or data operations management as we move into that. We're hoping that this series prepares people for them, and we're also hoping that you all, by seeing this series, will become interested in prepping for that particular course. Now, what do we mean by data management? Well, the key for it here is a very complicated diagram for after lunch, so I'll show you the management version, which is a simplified version of it. It really covers 5 data management functions. The first one is managing data coherently. If we aren't on the same piece of paper, then it's very hard to get any synergistic or leverage effects coming out of data management. Similarly, one of the main functions of data management is to share data across organizational boundaries and to do that as efficiently and effectively as you possibly can. That means that when data is shared between programs, when different parts of the organization, for example, the marketing department needs to share information with another part of the organization, say manufacturing, we want to put in place procedures that automate to the degree possible, and more importantly, assure that we're getting the right quality, that the data that is being shared is in fact fit for use. How do we make data fit for use? Well, until it gets personal, it's everybody's problem, and if it's everybody's problem, nobody works on it. So we have data stewardship as a data management activity that we need to put people's names on it. Again, Eileen, you can imagine if you came into work the next day and somebody said to you, you are now in charge of the letters A through Z on the customer list, and by the way, your raise next year depends on it, you'd pay a little bit of attention to it, whereas, of course, right at the moment, we practice, of course, very good data quality, data blueprint here, so we don't need to worry about that because we have people that take care of it for you. But again, Eileen, once your name is on it, you'd be paying attention to it. Our fourth function is data development, and this is the process of engineering data delivery systems. Now, in the past, and according to most colleges and universities, this means databases, but as you see from some of the events that we're working on, and again, the next one of these that we're going to do is the Enterprise Data World Conference coming up at the end of April, just a couple weeks in Atlanta. We're going to be talking about virtualization, XML, and all sorts of other technologies that are alternatives to the traditional data development activities. All of these are designed to make sure that we replicate data as appropriate, but do not have inappropriate duplication of data that ends up polluting your environment and making it more difficult to work in. And finally, our fifth category is data operations support. This is to maintain data availability. So this is the context in which these activities are taking place. Let's now take a specific look at what we mean by data operations management. And I'm showing you a page out of the DMBOK, the Data Management Guide to the Body of Knowledge, and you can see it's arranged in an IPO diagram. There are inputs on the left-hand side, deliverables or outputs on the right-hand side, activities in the middle, highlighted in teal there. There's some goals up top of it and some tools that we use underneath it, and you can see the various activities. Hopefully, again, by the end of this hour, you'll have a really good idea of what we're talking about. So when we say data operations management, our definition is planning, control, and support for the structured data assets across the life cycle from creation and acquisition through archival and purge. Now, I quibble slightly with the definition here, and we will be eventually revising the DMBOK. There's no real need to focus this exclusively on structured data assets. In fact, I like the term tabular and non-tabular data assets to describe them rather than structured and unstructured, although I was at a conference a week and a half ago and I heard somebody use the term multi-structured data assets. This is actually a problem for us. We need to get our terminology straight. When we speak of structured data assets, we're thinking the traditional record layout fields, fixed layout, things that go into a database. When we talk about unstructured or non-tabular, we're talking about documents. And these techniques that we're going to talk about today apply both to structured and unstructured, but just know for the moment that the DMBOK calls this a structured data management activity. That is something, as I said, that we may in fact modify and enhance in the future. So hopefully everybody's got a good definition. Again, the idea is if you create data assets, you need to make sure that they are cared for during their life cycle. Now, we'll talk about different life cycles of data. That is one of the big points of confusion in all of this. Now, why is it important? Well, let's take a look at some trends that are occurring right now. First one is that we've got I don't want to say a big switch to cloud computing, but that's what everybody's calling it. People are looking and trying to obtain synergies and cost efficiencies from putting their data in clouds. This also leads us to another concept that is becoming popular, and maybe we'll run another webinar on this sometime in the future. Or, again, the Dataversity website, Shannon may have another one of these already to go, for something that's being called big data. Now, I was on a conference call just before this one, and a friend of mine said, yeah, big data, it means that Oracle bought Sun, and they're trying to figure out what to do with all those servers now. No, that's a very cynical perspective on it. But what big data means is that when you study data management as a whole, you find that the databases that are out there are about 4% efficient. That means 96 out of every 100 cycles are not devoted to maintaining the data as an asset for the organization. And if we can do things to help speed that up, that is a very big improvement. But big data by itself does not solve specific problems. It's a largely hardware-oriented movement that does have some tremendous promise, but just like all silver bullets, they're really not very good for killing things. So again, we need your judgment to be applied here. You all are the community of practitioners that understand what your organizational needs are, and you'll learn a bit about what the various tools are, and then your job is to match the tool and the technique to the organizational problem. Another trend that we see in this is that tools that are facilitating remote teamwork. Lots of folks are working remotely or in distributed teams or collaborative type events, and so this is a huge, huge change. And again, operationalizing of data management operations is something that is important to these guys because it does allow people to become productive in a remote fashion. The third trend then is virtualization and trying to reduce the data storage expenses. Now, let me give you guys an alternative solution to this. It's perfectly good to say, I'm going to store data on expensive hard drives, or I'm going to put it on cheaper flash memory, or I'm going to put it in Amazon's or Microsoft's cloud. Terrific ideas, no problem with that. On the other hand, if you could put less data out there, wouldn't you? And that would be a severe way of reducing it. So it turns out that our studies show that 80% of corporate data out there falls into the category of rot. The data is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And so that really is going to give you a much better multiplier than just moving to the cloud. Now, we had a polling question here we were trying to ask, and Eileen, I don't know if we're going to try to do that or not.
Yep, we're still going to try it. So let's see if you can. Yep. So here's our first polling question, and let's see. Whoops.
We're really trying to ask the question, what do you guys see as these trends and where are they headed from your perspective? So again, in 2015, do you think that tablet sales are going to be equal to PCs, greater than PC sales, less than PC sales, or that both tablets and PCs are obsolete and been replaced by smartphones or something else at that point?
Exactly, and I'm trying to give you the option to at least select. Give me 1 second because I lost the feedback.
You'll notice that we're working remotely here even as we speak, so we certainly are practicing what we preach.
Oh, here we go. Hold on 1 second. Feedback. Yes. Oops.
You'll have to tell me because I can't see what you're doing from this perspective.
Actually, I think Shannon's going to pull it up. So there we go. Okay. Thank you, Shannon. Okay. So we're having people select A, B, C, or D, and it looks like we have which color does it looks like we have the majority of you think the answer is the green square. Unfortunately, I can't see what the green square stands for. Is it A, B, C, or D?
What you think is going to happen in 2015, because that way I'll know which way to place my stock investments, right?
B, okay.
Green stands for B. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So the correct answer was actually A. It's going to be the same, at least according to this article.
All right. Well, we'll see.
Yep.
Point is, obviously, there's lots and lots of devices, and the proliferation of devices does complicate your data management environment incredibly. It's called Bring Your Own Device, and you'll see your CIO is grappling with that issue as well. Thanks for the help on that there. That's interesting to look at on that. Our fourth trend is, again, outsourcing continuing to be very popular, although, again, from outsourcing your data management is something that you want to be extremely careful of. There may be some portions of operations management that may be useful for that, but at the same time, I think it's very, very careful. You want to be very careful in terms of moving out of this. And again, the fifth trend that we're seeing here is the move to mobile, where people are really moving out there. And again, this is the answer to the question. By 2015, nearly as many tablets will be sold as PCs. So mobile application software, 2012 is being designated as the year of the cloud in there. So again, with data increasing, it's really important that our operations be very, very efficient and effective, just to keep up with what we've got going now, much less what we've got coming in the future in this. So what are the data operations management building blocks? And again, we're working our way through this grid here. We've got all of these things here. We're going to look at the goals and principles, the activities, the primary deliverables, the roles and responsibilities, the technology, the practice, the techniques, and the organization and the culture. Again, let's dive into it. Goals and principles of data operations management. What we want to do is protect and ensure the integrity of the data assets that are there. Again, I'm quibbling slightly with the word structure. Maybe we'll have some discussion around that, but these are assets of the organization, and it is what we want to make sure we keep them safe. It's a little known fact, but if Osama bin Laden had hit New York City instead of on 9/11/2001, but sometime in the late 90s, we would not have been able to recover as fast, because just as I illustrated earlier, by making data quality or data stewardship a personalized thing, again, giving Eileen some very specific responsibilities, for example, she'll pay attention to it, but backup and recovery was not the personal responsibility of CIOs until about the mid-90s, and they didn't get good at it until the late 90s. So if he had hit us in the early 90s, we may not have been able to recover from the destruction that occurred on that dreadful day. The second goal and principle is to manage data availability throughout its life cycle. Now, most people think data life cycle, don't we just get data and it stays there? Well, there's two things that are happening. One, I've already mentioned the absolutely phenomenal increase in volume that is going on, and that we do have to pay attention to it, because we can't simply increase data volume forever. It will get to be too large. One of the organizations that I'm working with right at the moment has a very key database that has 193 billion with a B rows of data in it. Now, that's a big pile of data. I'll just leave it at that. The key to this is that data does have a life cycle, and you need to define the appropriate one for your organization so that data is created, read, updated, deleted eventually at the end of it. Some of your organizations have adopted data retention policies. For example, at Virginia Commonwealth University, we have a 3-year data retention policy. Of course, we keep the degrees around for a lot longer than that, but 3 years is what we're focusing on there. So at the end of life cycle, we then want to make sure data goes away. By the way, that's absolutely critically important. If you're ever involved in a lawsuit or a discovery type situation, the first question the judge asks the organization is, do you have a data retention policy? And the second question they ask is, are you following it? If you have one and you're not following it, good luck in that particular interaction with the legal system. The third goal and principle then of data operations management is to optimize the performance of your data delivery systems. It doesn't do any good just to have data delivery systems. You have to look at the business and see how the business is using your data delivery systems and evolve those systems into things that you're trying to get to. Now, let's dive into each of these a little bit more. Again, protect and ensure the integrity of the structured data assets here. Again, I've already mentioned the structured versus non-tabular and things like that, but the real question that you're trying to find out here is that if you step back from your organization, whether you're an NGO, a part of a government or a private firm or a public firm, data is one of your most important assets. And the question is, what are you doing to ensure the integrity and the availability of those data assets? It doesn't do any good to say, yes, they were here yesterday, but they're no longer here today. So most organizations don't think of the IT nature of data. What they think of is, oh, those guys have it covered and there's a backup, right? Well, it's actually not nearly as simple as that, as those of you that have been working in this area for many years understand very, very well. In order to protect and ensure your assets, you have to have a plan. You have to have a strategy, and your strategy has to be aligned with the organizational strategy. And many times when we walk into organizations and try to help them out, it turns out that their organizational strategy is not very robust, which means their data strategy can't be very robust either. You have sort of a weak link in the chain there. So find out what the strategy is of your organizations and see how data assets fall into that plan and see what you can do to help your organization do that. Now, our second goal and principle was the life cycle. Again, what is a life cycle? Well, we all know there's a human life cycle, sort of a tongue-in-cheek one that shows you right there on the screen there. The butterflies go through their life cycle. Frogs and amoebas go through their life cycle. So what's a data life cycle? Well, that is something that you'll need to define for your organization. Turns out that we started out and try to apply this to the organization's system development life cycle, but data lives beyond the system. So let me illustrate a couple of quick points along those lines. Our original data life cycle was something that conceptually made a lot of sense. Data was acquired, it was stored, and it was used. Well, remember, we're now talking about purging it. Some of you may work for organizations that require you to purge organizational data after 3 years, or purge your email after 90 days. There's a lot of different things that can occur in there. What we're trying to do by looking at this from this perspective here is to say, within the life cycle, and the life cycle that I'm showing you there is the one that's in the DM box. There's another life cycle that I'll put up here as well, which says analysis, design, build, test, and maintain. Your organization will have a life cycle of one form or another. But the more important point is that when you look at this, the individual life cycles that come up start out by a systems development effort. And you have some requirements that then make some requests for data and data assets, and those results come back and inform your design and implementation components that you go forward in there. Then you go to your next effort and you extend the utility of your information architecture, which is the accumulation of your data assets structured into a particular way. And the next system development life cycle then becomes a little bit more robust. You get a little bit better results from it. And your third, again, stronger still in terms of what you're trying to do. So if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see that the information architecture utility increases in its scope and its depth over time. It becomes more concrete. We end up with the number of requests increasing, the number of the results that are used become increasing, and the amount of metadata that new systems development adds to the system also increases. So from a data lifecycle perspective, what you're seeing here is that data exists beyond your systems development lifecycle, and that is something all organizations are having to grapple with and try to figure out where they operate within that framework. I'd be real surprised if I don't get a question or two on this particular slide. Let's look at one more life cycle here just to see, which is another version of the life cycle. When it's active, we have it on high performance storage. When the data becomes less active, we move it on to cheaper storage. When it becomes archival, we move it offline, perhaps, onto some backup medium in that sense. The point here is that your organization will need to take a look at this. I've got a couple of others up here just so that you can use to take a look at them. So again, those are mainly for reference that you can look at on these. The point is to find what's going to work for your organization. And when you look at it from your organization's perspective, then you can define a formal process for managing it through the life cycle. I hope that's clear. That's our second goal and principle on there. The third principle then is to optimize the performance of the data delivery systems. So not only are you juggling where the data is in its life cycle, but you're also asking your database administrators and your data administrators to help to optimize this. Now, many of you have big data systems that are out there that are running. I don't mean big data, but just very large data systems. Although big data is no different, you can't just let them run. You have to look at how these systems are evolving over time, reorganizing them, tuning, tweaking, responding to new business needs. If you are not, you are definitely underserving the organization and perhaps paying a hardware vendor too much money. So in today's environment, even though we seem to be coming out of the end of the recession on this, it's a great place to go look and see if you can save some money by performing some optimization of your data delivery systems. You'd be amazed at what a tenfold increase, a little tune-up, can result in a tenfold increase in terms of your data delivery systems. And that tenfold increase is the kind of thing that people will pay attention to. Similarly, the DBAs need to deliver and set up, if it hasn't been established, a production environment, a test environment. They need to establish procedures for the implementation of changes. They need to make sure that they have service level agreements so that the data is available when it is needed and promised, in this case, to the various business users that are working with this. We also want to make sure that we have proactive error prevention, correction, and detection in there. We sent around on a Twitter feed a few minutes ago a newspaper article in the Washington Post this morning that says that the United Kingdom has 17,000 males that have become pregnant. It sounds like a miracle, but if you think about it, it's really just a data quality error. And again, these are errors that are made when people are coding the data in there. It's a really neat little article. Might help to get some attention in your organization if you want to go in and check the number of pregnant men in your database, see if you've got more than in the UK. Finally, these systems evolve over time, meaning that you're going to have new versions of the software. They're going to find patches, things like that. You may have multiple installations. You may have different database management system parameters. You may have connectivity issues. You may have storage issues. These are just some of the things that you need to pay attention to from a data operations management perspective. Now let's look a little bit more closely at specific database support. And remember, my definition of database here is we're being very inclusive. So this applies to big data. It applies to master data. It applies to data quality. It applies to all the things that are out there. So the first one is, implementing and controlling the database environment. That's very, very crucial to make sure that happens and happens the way you'd like it to. You don't want them to control you, right? In addition, though, you're also going to be obtaining some data that comes from outside of the organization into your databases. What are the procedures for that? Can anybody stick data into your systems, or do you have proper access methods set up? And that's assuming that they've got everything else correct, and they just need permissions in order to do that. But the other part of it is, are you speaking the same vocabulary as them? Is the data semantically, contextually consistent from that perspective? You need to look at planning for data recovery. I've already mentioned 9/11. Organizations, it's not just a matter of saying, yes, the plan looks good. You really need to try the plan to see what works. So we've worked with a lot of organizations that have done disaster recovery and things like that, being able to back up and recover the data, because if you can't do it, it's going to be problematic for you. What are we trying to do from a service level agreement from the databases? Again, it's one of those situations where if you don't have a written agreement, it's hard for somebody to say, okay, looks good. In class last night, we were talking about user-friendly interfaces. What is the definition of a user-friendly interface? Well, an objective definition of a user-friendly interface might be one that somebody can perform the tasks within 10 seconds of picking up the device and not accessing a manual. There you have an objective criteria. Same thing here. What are the objective criteria that you're trying to perform? I recently saw an organization who threw out an MDM vendor because the MDM vendor couldn't provide sub-second access to their customer master file that they were working with, because they wanted to recognize people when they came in a particular doorway. It was a matter of grabbing a sensor off of the individual and having it come back and greet them. Now, I don't know anything about that particular technology, but I do know that that may not have been the actual right service level to do it. If it's a store situation, somebody could have walked through the door. You might actually have 10 or 15 seconds before they approach a counter or approach a clerk, to where you can, in fact, provide them up and say, oh, Peter Aiken's in the store, and he's a big customer. He likes to spend lots of money, and he likes to buy plane tickets. Actually, I don't like to buy plane tickets, but we won't get into that. Anyway, you get the sense there. So what are the performance agreements that you have? And then how can we, within our existing constraints, tune and perform the database so that it will do that? We also need to see whether it's beyond the capabilities of our databases. And sometimes organizations will use that as an excuse to go to the cloud, because the cloud, of course, we don't need to worry about versioning. Somebody else has the problem of doing that particular task. We need to plan for the data retention. How are we going to make sure we can have access to things that are appropriate? We do have access to, but at the same time, things that we don't necessarily want to have access to? What are our procedures around archive, retain, and purge? And finally, there are some specialized databases that are starting to appear that allow us now to do some things that we couldn't do in the past. And again, I will caution you, as a university professor, I'm very proud of the job that our universities do, but they are behind where industry is. Universities are still teaching young people that a relational database management system is the only thing you should have to learn about from data management perspective. And so consequently, students come out of colleges and universities learning really well how to use a hammer and trying to see every problem as a nail. That doesn't help us in the long run. We do need to look at some of these specialized technologies. Another component of this is, again, what are our data technology requirements? I've mentioned several times, it's way beyond databases. We're now trying to spread out and make people understand that there's a lot more involved in this value chain. It's a concept called the information value chain that we're starting to see come into play, and that's actually very, very good. It also means we need to define a data technology architecture, which is another part of the architecture of your entire IT organization. So if you're starting one, you should hopefully get yours to sync up with theirs. And if not, maybe you starting one, you can help them to actually get started as well. This also gives you the opportunity to benchmark and evaluate the various comparative technologies. Again, I've been in several organizations where they said, let's set up a bake-off, and we'll have this versus that. Actually, Gartner and Forrester and the other advisory services do a really good job of that, and you can probably save your efforts on that and just go buy a report somewhere on that. But again, sometimes it is appropriate to see if, can we get an iPhone or an iPad or a Droid to do that. By the way, Droids are perfectly valid data management technologies. You're going to see more and more of them. Again, it goes back to the bring your own device thing we talked about earlier. Finally, there's a licensing piece on this as well. And again, if you're looking to save money in your organizations, you'd be amazed. We've worked with organizations that have had twice as many licenses for technology as they've had for their employees. So they have 10,000 employees and they have 20,000 Microsoft Office licenses or Access licenses and things like that. So go back and count those things. See if that makes sense. And then see how you're using them. Remember, the average server utilization is around 15%. So you do have some opportunities to do some consolidation there if you haven't already had an opportunity to do that as well. So let's move on now from the goals and principles here to what are the primary deliverables. The first one is an operational database management environment. And again, I'm using the term database here to mean all of your data delivery systems, not just your databases. So this includes portals, XML, virtualization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You need to make sure that you deliver one. However, you probably inherited one from your predecessor, and it is your job to look at this and determine the appropriateness of what they're attempting to do matched against the organizational goals. If the organization doesn't have goals that are consistent with that, then you're either overspending or underspending and need to look at it from that perspective as well. You also need a set of databases to go and play with. Sometimes these are referred to as the sandbox. Development and test, quality and control, disaster recovery, production databases. How many do you need? Believe me, the vendors out there would like to sell you a lot of them. You may need a bunch, but you may not need as many as the vendors think that you need. But you can't just do this, and you can't just assume that somebody on staff is taking care of this unless you're formally doing a study to see what happens there. We've already mentioned externally sourced data. How are we managing that? What is the database management performance that we're trying to get? And what is the business problem that we're trying to solve as we go through that process of making sure the data works? We've already talked about recovery plans and business continuity. Again, how long can the business be down, like not operational, before things start to get really, really bad? The last thing anybody wants is to wake up and go, oh, we were down, or worse still, as happened to several big retailers over the holiday season, I'm sorry, folks, we can't accept credit cards even though it is the busiest time of the year. So all of these things are going to play into that role of your deliverables. What is it you want the organization to focus on? And then, by the way, when you achieve these goals, go back and tell people about it as well. Hey, we made it through Christmas and we never had any credit cards refused. Well, you know what? You're actually doing better than some of the competition there as well. Overall roles and responsibilities, you're going to have a series of suppliers that are going to be giving you information. They're going to come from IT executives. There is likely to be some sort of an IT steering committee. We're hoping that you all have a data governance council and that you have some data stewards that are involved in there that will also coordinate with the architects and the modelers and the software developers. These are the folks that are designing the solutions to deliver the data that your organization needs to supply its customers with their products and services. You're going to have a different group that's going to be called the participants. These are the folks that take the instructions from the suppliers, and now they're told to make it happen. So we tend to call this IT operations, but really it's a combination of database administrators and software developers who haven't always worked well in the past together. There's going to be a project management component to it likely, and you're going to have some architects and analysts, and then again data administration executives and other managements. Looks like damn executives. I wonder if I did that on purpose. And finally, of course, we have the output side of the equation, the data consumers who create the data, the information consumers who use the reports, the enterprise customers that rely on the operations that are being performed by the knowledge workers there, as well as our data professionals and other professionals that go into this. Let me just add a quick word here on the data consumer side of things. There's unfortunately a big gap that's occurring in here, and I'm working on a paper that's almost done that addresses this issue pretty squarely on. If you ask the business, they think that IT is responsible for the data. If you ask IT, they think the business is responsible for the data. So we have this gap where both sides are sort of pointing to the other and saying, I thought you were taking care of that. Basically, IT, from a traditional perspective, says if you have access to the system, our job is done. Whereas the business thinks, well, data is technology, so therefore it ought to be handled by the technology group, and that would fall under the CIO, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Be aware of that in your organization. It may be a good awareness-raising issue if you bring some of these folks into the same room and say, now you thought this was happening and you thought this was happening, but it turned out neither one of those things were happening. So maybe we ought to make it happen, whatever it is that needs to happen. Our next focus here, again, last one for this subsection, is what is the data operations management technology? And of course that starts off with database management systems. Some of you have the good fortune to have worked with many, many different data management systems, and I don't want to say something stupid like they're all the same. They have some similar goals and objectives, but different ways of getting there. So you will see different technologies have different capabilities. Your job, again, as a technologist is to figure out what are the appropriate ones. One of the biggest fallacies, and again I'm getting on my high horse about the academics here, is that we've taught students that relational database management systems are the only way to go. In fact, we've taken chapters out of the books that used to address things like hierarchical and network database management systems and put them in web archives so that the students never become exposed to these ideas. So again, it's if the only tool you know how to use is a hammer, every problem tends to look like a nail. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into with data management problems, and it turns out that they're trying to get a relational database to do something that a network database does much better. So again, knowledge of those systems is incredibly important. The next category here is data development tools. These are the tools and techniques that people use, data modeling and other types of things, where you can develop the artifacts, the containers that you're going to put data into. These data development tools are important. There is not a lot of training on them. We do very, very little in colleges and universities on them, so you're going to have an awful lot of on-the-job training. And it's hard to keep up, which, again, is another great reason for attending the Enterprise Data World Conference upcoming. I just love saying that because we like to see 1,000 data managers in the same room. It's really a lot of fun. Again, database administration tools, which is to say that we need to run the data. It's everything from knowing how to crank up Toad, the Oracle Development Application, or the Oracle Application Development, or any other of the types of tools that are out there. But you have to know how to run these databases. So again, a very, very specialized task, And in most organizations, it's not a well-recognized skill, but you ought to be very, very glad that these folks are doing the job that they're doing there. And finally, you've just got general old office productivity tools where people can gain access to the tools and, again, just learn how to communicate and work, whether it's remotely or anything else. So that's our set of deliverables that we've looked at in there in terms of what's going on with it. Let's dive a little bit further now and talk about specifically how are you going to improve your operations management? Because in many organizations, it's been run the same way for 10 years and nobody's thought to look at anything different. Now that does give you a tremendous opportunity to turn what is currently a business challenge for you into a wonderful opportunity. So let's spend a few minutes on looking at that. First piece is configurable operations. What we're looking at here is trying to see how we can make these various machines work properly. This may be virtual servers. It may be the idea that we can roll out new things. For example, one of the projects I had a real privilege to be involved with was as troops were getting ready to be deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, they actually had some data needs. So they needed to stand up a data environment for a group of soldiers, men and women of the armed forces, going off into a foreign country and doing the things that we needed to have done over there. Well, they needed to be able to essentially snap their fingers and say, here, we need to get 50 people or 500 people ready to go with their deployable data environments. And they were using these configurable operations to be able to do this without, again, trying to make it oh my goodness, they had to have this as an absolute mechanized process, an absolute automated process. The second trend that's occurring in this area is lean, and you'll hear this is just in time and all sorts of other things on this. The idea is that we are trying to take some of the lean manufacturing techniques and define them so that we end up with little or no waste on this. And when you apply it to a data management environment, it actually becomes kind of fun. If you look at what happens in an awful lot of cases, we create a bunch of things, but we never really clean up the mess. So this is where I get back to my 80% of corporate data is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. It allows you to look at some just-in-time provisioning or push and pull type of production things. It's a lot of variables. It's a new way of seeing things. I had a terrific meeting the other day with a client, and it was a really interesting meeting because they had spent a lot of time and effort and hired a phenomenal individual to be their data manager for their operations group. And the only problem I had in looking over what they were doing, which was what they'd asked me to do, was that they were building a very, very good 1990s era data processing shop. Again, it was if they succeed it and if it meets their needs, they'll do great. But I wouldn't really be going out and building 1990s era data processing shops in today's environment. There's too many good opportunities to take care of in there. And that gets us into this concept of acceleration. What is it we can do to speed things up in the online world? Now, again, Dataversity hosted a conference last fall called, what was it? NoSQL, that's what it was, Shannon, NoSQL. And interesting different types of problems that people were working with. So if you're in a startup mode and you're getting ready to add 50,000 users a week to your website, that gives you a very different set of problems than if you're a bank cranking out statements for the same 50,000 customers month after month. There are all kinds of exciting opportunities out there where people are going to become very, very specialized in terms of their discipline, but it means that we now need to look specifically at how do we accelerate things that we have not been able to accelerate before. Excuse me, and that brings us to our second polling question in here, which the question is, what's been named as the most impactful trend? That's an awful word, isn't it, Eileen? We'll have to work on that one. We didn't write that one, by the way. That was somebody else's piece. But the question for you guys is, what do you think has been the trend with the most impact? Big data, service-oriented architecture, cloud computing, or reverse engineering?
Let's see what you think here. I see everyone's been reading the headlines, following the keywords, because everyone selected
Everyone,
cloud computing, and that is correct. Well, almost. The majority, I'm sorry, the majority of you selected cloud computing, and that is the correct answer, at least from the article that we referred to. Thanks,
Actually,
everyone.
a series of articles, and if you go to Gartner in particular, Gartner has a quote up on that says the cloud is the most hyped technology, not just this year, but ever. So again, be careful of this when people come at you with these types of ideas. Yes, there's some good ideas in them, but the ideas that are really good are the ones that you're going to look and say, I've got this operational problem that I'm trying to solve, and now that I know what this tool does from a capabilities perspective, I think it might work. Let's give it a try. Again, our next trend here is hybrid architectures, which is to say that, again, a mixture of cloud-based and non-cloud-based is entirely appropriate for some organizations and entirely inappropriate for other organizations. We have all sorts of problems where people tend to do things because they think it's the thing to do, not because it's a good idea. So hybrid architectures are good. And finally, the consumerization of IT, which is, again, the bring your own device that you're seeing in here. People are no longer going to be content to say, oh, you can't connect that machine to our network, you have to use one of these, because after all, a personal computer is the thing that makes us personally more productive. So this consumerization trend is going to be very, very important as well. Let's look at specific responses in this case now. Again, what we're trying to do from an operations perspective is synchronize people with process. About 10% of the organizations out there formally manage a process architecture. If you belong to one of those organizations, that gives you a robust advantage because you have something that you can manage. Other organizations have process architectures, but they're not understood and they can't manage them. So it's impossible to synchronize their people with their processes. But if you have it, you should do it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we've got some reading materials at the end there that we can let you look at, and be glad to talk to anybody further offline on that. Another response here then is trying to figure out if we can systematize demand management. I don't know about you guys, but in my neighborhood, I'm really glad I have DSL because I have friends that have cable, and when they come home at 5 o'clock, the response time on cable goes very poor because everybody comes home from work and hits the internet, and the internet slows down. Well, if you understand that's a pattern that you have, you'd hope that the cable companies would get better about systematizing their approach to demand management in there, but they are not as mature as some of the other organizations are. Another response is trying to automate to the degree possible. Again, all repetitive time-critical tasks is a great goal to try and hit. It doesn't mean that that's going to be appropriate for your organization, but look to see what you can do from an automation perspective. Again, integrating people and the systems processes is the other half of that automating people and the processes part of it. This allows us to orchestrate various different types of activities, whether it's domain automation or release control in here. Operations calendars. What do we have that works from an operations perspective, and how do we look at this from a calendar perspective? We had a job to do at one point in time in a data center, and they had taken the data center offline because they had to change out the air conditioning units. I know that's not a very good example there, but again, what's going on from the calendar perspective? We didn't know there was a calendar, so we couldn't look at that. Service management is another component here as well, and again, you'll see this remains stuck in the 20th century. People look at trying to do things and keep records, but not actually try to figure out the why of what's going on in there. So there's a lot in this service management category that you can dive into. We don't have time right now to do this. Let's move finally to some guiding principles here. And the first one is write everything down. I know that sounds crazy, but it's absolutely critically important from an operations perspective. You'd be amazed at how many organizations that I go to work with, and when we talk about the operations management and how they're doing there, it's like, well, we got Fred. And it's like, okay, I'm glad you have Fred, but what happens if Fred hits the Mega Millions lottery? Fred might not come back in tomorrow. So you need to have things documented. If you don't have them documented, you're not able to do this. When we say keep everything, what we want is the records of what's happening. So again, it's not the data retention we're talking about here, but it's the procedures, the operations management procedures. And again, where possible, automate those procedures so that we can get people thinking in terms of this, and more importantly, trained in the various areas that we need to have them trained in, so that people will expect things to be done in a certain fashion. Fourth one is try to get the focus, the business context of the task, and try to do only one thing at a time. You've all heard the horror stories, I think, of various companies. There was a chocolate company that tried to do too much technology change at one time. I've told this story at numerous conferences, and they screwed up and they couldn't deliver chocolate to people at the holiday season, and that almost killed their business. So again, doing too many things at once is just complicated. You have the law of unintended consequences that you are fighting against at that point in time. I was home for the weekend, and I actually got to replace some of the fencing around my barn, and the old measure once, measure twice, cut it once came in very, very handy there when I'm cutting a piece of board and putting it up to replace some fencing that had come down. It's absolutely critical because I've only got so much and I'm dragging it around behind me. You guys aren't going to be picking this stuff up, but again, let's do a little bit of planning, figure out what's happening in that particular process. When you do have something that goes wrong, don't freak out. It's the worst thing that can happen. There's certainly somebody somewhere that's saying, oh, the website's down and it's costing us $100,000 an hour in sales, right? So you better fix it. Well, panic causes more errors than not. So again, sit back, take a deep breath. It's not going to hurt if you wait another second to just make sure that you've got the right solution in place. Remember, this is not about technology. It's about the business. And if there's one generic criticism that we see leveled at this area, data operations management, it's that people are allied more to the technology than they are to the business. Even if you don't care about the business, pretend you care about the business. It'll go a long way and it'll get you a lot of points with people. Because people aren't really willing to collaborate if they feel your aims aren't aligned. So if you can work together to collaborate, to audit everybody's work, and to double check these various things. Again, one of the most helpful things that people can say is to give you some constructive criticism. Hey, I know that worked out really well and you got it to work, but next time if we'd run it through development and test before we'd actually put it in production, we might not have had quite such a heart attack there at the end. There's a lot of resources at your disposal, everything from Google is your friend to where are the errors in the Oracle manual. That is one of my favorite pieces. When we teach the students how to build new Oracle databases at the university, one of the things that they always have trouble with is that the Oracle manuals have some errors in them. So quickly they learn to find the website that keeps track of all the Oracle manual errors. Lots of things that are there. Finally, you do have to keep up to date. You want to be careful not to be on the bleeding edge of technology, but certainly to be on the leading edge of technology, because the vendors out there are working extraordinarily hard to try and keep your technology set up to date. If you can imagine the complexity of having to have an installation of Oracle in with a portal, in with a service-oriented architecture, in with some XML and things get very complicated very quickly, and if one part of it falls out, it's kind of like the plugins on your PC. You want to make sure everything is as current as you can possibly make it without going too far in that direction. Always a question of balance. So here's our agenda. We've looked at overall on this again. What is data operations management? Why is it important? What are the building blocks? What are the things that you can do in your organization to make data operations play an important role? And by the way, be seen as playing an important role. The job that we do in this area is extremely important, and people just assume it happens. It doesn't just happen. It's hard work, it's a lot of study, and it's a really, really phenomenal achievement that we've gotten to with some of the things that we have managed to put in place on this. I want to leave you with one last thought here. My friend Jack Olson has written a wonderful book. If you have not gotten to the point of saying, oh, we do need to archive data and figure out what that means. Jack Olson has written a tremendous book on this. It's a great introduction to it. We also leave you with a bunch of other books that we're looking at specifically here in the DM box. So this is the guide to the rest of the literature here that you can see. And at that point, we get to the top of the hour, and it's time for you guys to ask some questions. So, and I'll ask Eileen, too. Did anybody tweet?
No, we didn't see a whole lot come through the tweet.
Actually,
that's okay. It's still a new thing.
You bet.
Still a new thing that we're trying out. Well, thanks, Peter. That was great. Like you said, now it's time for Q&A and time for our participants to ask any questions you may have. If you currently still have your screen in full screen mode and you can't see the chat window, just move your mouse to the top of the screen, and that should change the view, so the chat window should show up. And let's see if we have anything coming through. We can start with some of the basic questions that people usually have. Something that we get asked a lot. Peter, how do organizations determine what their life cycle even is?
Oh, that's a great question. I gave you a bunch of different examples there, and unfortunately maybe people are more confused than not. It's important to formalize your definition of what your data life cycle is, because if you don't have it, you can't improve it. Again, it goes back to if you can't measure it, you can't, right? You know, the usual old saw there. So from an organizational perspective, pick your organization and then say, how is it that we use data at the most basic level, at the throughput level? What are we doing to use data as fuel? What are we using to do data to make important decisions in the organization? And how are we using that information to provide goods and services to customers? You'll see an awful lot of organizations that have ill-defined procedures. For example, one of the things that's kind of an interesting thing, I'm going to hop on a plane here in a bit, and one of the things they're going to ask me for is my reservation number. Well, my reservation number is GQ7192X. It's not much of a number, is it? On the other hand, what it is a short URL, kind of like a tiny URL that points to a lot of information. In fact, that same system there can be used by multiple airlines. So I'm flying out to the West Coast on Delta, and I'm flying back on US Air. And that's okay, I guess, with both airlines, but more importantly, I can use the same record code locator there. They're not going to need that information once I get off the plane in DC. Okay, when I finish. So there's a life cycle for that URL that they can then recycle and reuse at some point. It beats the heck out of memorizing a 16-digit ticket that starts with 006, which is the Delta ticket starting number. It goes all the way into there. Anyway, I babble on there. Eileen, what other questions do we have?
Can you give an example of data in different uses or different stages throughout the life cycle?
Let's take a quick look here. Let's pick a life cycle first of all, and then we'll come back to try and give an illustration of it. Good question. And this is really the way you want to start off that particular process. So I'll pick a very simple, let's do a simple one and then a complicated one. So here's the simple one, which again is data is acquired and data is used. So let's pretend we're a company that sells magazine subscriptions. So the acquisition data may be that we're trying to get people's names who might be interested in purchasing subscriptions to our magazine. Those acquisition activities are going to be important. By the way, if you outsource that, as this one organization we were working with did, and they forgot to put a service level agreement in place so that they were only getting 30% of the data they had contracted for, that could have an impact on your business. But once we've stored that data and used it by going back to those customers and saying, hey, would you like to buy a magazine subscription, which is basically what the pitch is to them. The question is, do you keep that data at the end of that cycle and say, well, okay, maybe we'll keep it because we might have a new offering for them? Or do you in fact say, okay, well, we're done and there's no point in maintaining that anymore. If they said they don't want it, they don't want it. So we won't try and bug them about that particular question. Let me move on to a more in-depth life cycle here. I'm sorry, I'm getting my screen all messed up. There we go. So here's a much more involved data life cycle that a different organization uses. In this case, they start out by capturing the data. So again, I'm at 12 o'clock on your screens there. But what they do after that for this organization, it's important for them to next secure the data. Now, you might say, secure the data? What's that mean? Well, for this organization, capturing was important, but making sure once they had captured it, they were not going to get an opportunity to uncapture it or to capture it a second time. Think of it something along the lines of a spy, and they have one chance to transmit data in there. You better make sure that you get a good copy and make sure that you secure that. Well, that information gets put into a big database that a different analyst then looks at and does a way of accessing it. So again, let's take it out of the spy category, but make it an industrial espionage story. So again, somebody's going to go visit a company. They want access to all the information about that company they've managed to do. They view it. They analyze it. They may change it. They may share that information with others on the team or others in the planning activity. They may restore the data. They may archive it, and they may, in fact, evolve it. So this life cycle here probably isn't appropriate for most organizations. But again, the question is, for your organization, what will work? So I've given you a bunch of models. Probably all of them are wrong for you. That's okay. At least you know what doesn't work. Now you can try to get to say what does work. The fundamental activities really involve create, reading, updating, and deleting the data. And ideally, you'd like to see those mapped against your business processes. But as I said, only 10% of organizations formally manage their business processes. So if you're not in one of those 10% of the organization, you may have to create some of that metadata as well. By the way, the chart that you'd pull up with that is called a CRUD matrix. Create, read, update, and delete. And some people add archive onto the end of that, which is okay. This business process will archive the data. Again, perfectly fine in terms of doing that. Hopefully that helps. If not, please ask another question.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Let's see what else we have come through here. Feel free to use both the public and private chat. Okay, what is the importance of data backup and recovery, and how has it evolved over time?
I hope I don't have to really lecture you on the importance of backup and recovery. I guess the best way to think about it is all of our PCs that we're working with, tablets, PDAs, smartphones, it's not a question of if they will fail, it's a question of when. And if you adopt that mindset, because that is the truth, then you know that you can't just continue to put information in there and expect that it's going to be available for you in the future. Hope I don't get in too much trouble. My wife likes to use the voice note feature on her smartphone. So she'll pick up her smartphone and talk to it and say, remind me to do this. And we lost those at one point. She was pretty darn upset. So yeah, it's not a question of if it's going to fail, it's a question of when it's going to fail. And once you adopt that mentality, that leads you directly to the, well, okay, I better back it up on a regular basis then, because if I don't back it up and it disappears, my wife's mad at me, if nothing else. What was the second half of that question, Eileen?
The second half was, how has data backup and recovery evolved over time?
All right, well, I just happened to come up with that example, so great question. Thank you for that. So the way it works in my wife's case, she only has to take her iPhone and put it in her charger. And it backs it up all by itself. But she doesn't like to do that. She's not a person who adheres to lots of repetitive behaviors in there. So she just doesn't put it down and it doesn't get backed up. But imagine that. I have a smart device, and all I have to do is put it in a power source, and it backs it up. Now, that's not going to happen, if you haven't engineered that into your system. So again, your job as data management professionals is to look at the requirements of the organization and figure out what's appropriate for that. But that sounds like magic to her. She just puts it in the cradle and boom, it backs up. Wow. Cool. That's pretty good. I'm not sure how much further we'll get beyond that, but that seems to me pretty advanced compared to a lot of other things that go on.
Let's see. Next question we have, what are some of the typical job titles for people charged with the data management operations responsibilities?
You know, that's a great question. And one of the things I'm really proud about DAMA International is that the U.S. Department of Labor Statistics reached out to us a little while ago and said, I don't think we've got the right categories of people. Can you guys help us to define those? So there is an effort going on. One of the online job searches. By the way, there is an online job search at the dama.org website as well for data management professionals. And see what sort of things people are putting in there. But they do vary from organization to organization, from industry to industry. It may be something as simple as a, IT specialist grade 3, or it may be the principal database archivist. So again, you'll have a lot of variation in those. I'm not sure really which one to tell you is correct. And there, again, it's going to be what works for your organization. So go talk to your HR folks, see what they have to say.
Great, thank you, Peter. And I think it looks like that was the last question for today. Well, I don't see anything else coming through, so thank you everyone for participating in today's event. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again for Dataversity and to Shannon for hosting us. At this point, we would also just draw your attention to a big event that's happening at the end of this month, Enterprise Data World, one of Dataversity's events in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a huge event for all the data management professionals, and it's happening, I believe, April 29th till May 2nd. Is that right? Yeah, so that's a great conference. We always see lots of experts on data management, and Peter will be there as well.
Yeah,
so once again,
down there should be great.
Yeah, it's a great event. Once again, you'll receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. And next month, we'll focus on data security, how safe is your data. And hopefully, you'll be able to join us for that as well. And as always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Arlene. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks for stepping on the pole, Shannon.
Absolutely, anytime. Everybody have a great day and enjoy.
We appreciate it. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Are you coming down to EDW?
Of course. I will see you.
We'll see you.
Great.
All right. Have a good flight, Peter.
Thanks. Bye-bye.